Right, so we get started again. I did bring some sweets with me from Ireland, so you can have a chew there. It'll help to keep your sugar levels up and keep you awake. And at least if people ask you about the lecture, you can say, well, the lecture was very bad, but the sweets were very good. Great. Thank you very much. Just pass it on to Thomas. Yeah, right. Now, my hope would be that you people here this morning would serve as the trainers of the rest of the university. Because all you need is you need a set of PowerPoint slides, background information, and then you can teach all of your colleagues. There are two things that all of your colleagues will need. The first is what we did this morning, how to write learning outcomes. But the next step is also important. In the next step, we have to look at how to link the learning outcomes to two things: teaching and learning and assessment. Now, Peter will give me 10 minutes when I'm ready to come here again. Now, Stephen Adams is one of the world's Bologna experts, and he made the point that writing learning outcomes isn't so much, the beginning, but it really is the first step. And the second step is that it's involving curriculum design and an assessment. And we want to particularly look at assessment today. Now, this is our key question. How will I know if my students have achieved desired learning outcomes? And how will I measure the extent to which they've achieved these learning outcomes? Now, the first thing to remember about learning outcomes is they are not like electronic switches. It is not a case of ticking a box and saying the student has or has not achieved learning outcome. Because, of course, different students will achieve learning outcomes to different extents. You give an essay or an assignment to your student, and some students will do a brilliant essay covering all the main points and quoting all the relevant literature. And they might have achieved the learning outcome to the extent of 90%. And other students may have only barely scraped the surface and may only have got a mark of 42%. So the students have achieved the learning outcomes to different extents. Now, there are two books which I think everybody teaching at university should have in their office. These two books are all about how to be a really good teacher at university. And one is by Paul Ramsden. And in that book, Paul Ramsden talks about various misconceptions about assessment. And essentially what he's saying is that many people look on assessment as just an end product. That we teach a course, and then at the end of the course we assess it. And what Paul Ramsden is saying is that assessment should be built into our teaching. In other words, we should be using assessment for learning as well as assessment of learning. And this assessment for learning is commonly referred to as formative assessment. And in formative assessment, what we do is as we teach the course, we are giving feedback to our students. Now, before I went to teach at university, I taught in a high school for about 20 years. I used to only teach part-time at university during that time. I would come in on my half day. And formative assessment in high schools is quite common because, of course, every day you give the students homework and they try the homework and then they come in and you look at it and you mark it and you discuss it. And so you're giving feedback every time the homework is marked. But at university, we don't use that. We are not used to it. At university, most of our teaching is done just by the lecture method. And what Paul Ramsden is saying is that we need to bring in more feedback to our students. We need, for example, to give more tests. Instead of having 100% of the marks at the end of the year, we should perhaps have 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%. Spread out. And the final exam might only be more than 20%. Something like that. So this is where assessment is integrated into teaching and learning. And the expert on formative assessment is a man by the name of Paul Black from the Institute of Education in London. Some people say that with formative assessment, you shouldn't actually be marking it. It shouldn't be worth any marks or a percentage of the overall. But I wouldn't agree with that because unless you give some marks, the students won't take it seriously. So by giving marks and giving feedback to the students on how they should improve, we can certainly improve teaching and learning at university level. We're all familiar with the idea of the summative assessment. We've all dreaded that, where you do a course and then you go in and you sit in examination for 3 hours. And the problem about summative assessment is that all you get is a mark at the end of the year. You have no opportunity to improve because it's all over. The year is finished. So summative assessment has its advantages, but it also has its disadvantages. And that's the major disadvantage, that you cannot give feedback to the students. Continuous assessment then is a mixture of summative and formative. So multiple choice tests, for example, would be examples of continuous assessment. They're used a lot in medical faculty, for example, MCQs. But the problem about MCQs is that unless you give feedback to the students, telling them where they went wrong, they cannot improve as a result. So with continuous assessment, you just give marks to the student, but you don't sit down with the student or find out where they went wrong. Because very often MCQs are marked by a computer. So what is assessment? Well, a very simple definition. I'll give you the very complicated ones. But really, assessment is all about finding out what our students know and can do with that knowledge. Now, sometimes in the English language we have the word evaluation and we have the word assessment. And sometimes there's a bit of confusion about the meaning of those two words. Evaluation is always about making a judgment. So when an external examiner comes to my university, he evaluates my work and he will write a report on what he thinks is the standard at which I am doing my job. So that's an evaluation. Whereas with assessment, you're seeing how effective is your teaching, for example. So evaluation is always about making a judgment of quality. But when you're assessing a student, what you're doing is you're trying to find out what that student knows and understands. You're not evaluating your own teaching, for example. You're evaluating what the student knows, i.e. you're assessing the student. Now, there's a few big questions about assessment. There's a lot of talk about assessment now, particularly in the light of the Bologna process, insofar as how we can improve things at university. And this is certainly one of the areas, the balancing of the assessment for learning, formative assessment, with the assessment of learning, the summative assessment. So one of the things that an external examiner might do is they might look at how you're assessing the students. And if you're only assessing the students by means of a terminal exam, that is not a very good way of assessing. If 100% of the marks are going for a final examination, that is not good, because the student could be ill on the day, or not feeling good, or may have just messed up some questions. And some students are better at learning over longer periods. So those are the sort of things that we are looking at. And sometimes, if we move into this other area of assessment, we're often accused of dumbing things down, that we're making it too easy for the students. But of course we're not, because all we are doing is we're helping the students to show their strengths through other ways of assessing. So this is the traditional way that we tend to have. You know, I mean, the days are gone when the professor is the supreme command. When the professor just picks out a mark. I've read your exam paper and I'm giving you a mark of 65. And the student wonders, where did you get to 65? And of course, nowadays the students are entitled to know where the 65 came from. So the days are gone when we can have vague criteria. And now, with new approaches, students are getting involved in projects. We have things like peer-assisted learning. In my own university, to help our students stay on at university, and to cope the second-year students and the third-year students, help out tutoring the first-year students. It's called Peer-Assisted Learning, or PAL. And this is a very good way of helping our students to cope. Other things like, group work, for example, or group projects are coming into university. Now, when we're assessing learning outcomes, you may recall in the first session this morning, I said we should always have in the back of our mind, when we write a learning outcome, we must always have in the back of our mind, how are we going to assess this learning outcome? And so, learning outcomes and assessment go hand in hand. There are various examples and techniques. You've all come across those ones in your university here. So nothing new about those techniques as such. In university level, those are common types of assessment techniques. In education, we use this a lot because when we're training teachers to go out into classes, they must keep a portfolio of all the lessons that they've prepared, and they're marked on that portfolio. So, nothing problematic about that. So, the match between the learning outcomes and the assessment is very important. And what I'm going to do now is have a look at how we can try to match the learning outcomes to the assessment. Because we need to vary the assessment as a result of multiple intelligences theory. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of a man called Howard Gardner. He was a professor of education in Harvard University in the United States. And he was making the point that all of us have different strengths or different intelligences. Some people might be very good at mathematical and logical intelligence. Other people might be very intelligent in the field of music or the arts or creativity. And what he's saying is that we should vary the assessment in order to take into account the different abilities of our students. So, assessment based solely on terminal exams is not intelligence fair. It's not fair to people who work best over a longer, extended period of time than people who can cram and do everything in just a 2 or 3 hour examination at the end. So here we have some questions, okay, that I want to ask you. Now, here we have a learning outcome. We have 4 learning outcomes, and we have the link of these with the appropriate method of assessment. So if we take the first one, if we have a learning outcome that at the end of this module, students should be able to demonstrate good presentation skills, which of these methods of assessment would operate? D, exactly. So one would be D is the only way to assess that learning outcome is to ask them to make a presentation. So as we look at this, supposing 2 students are working in the area of food science, okay, and are thinking of making a new yogurt that everybody will love. How can we assess whether they have the ability to make that yogurt? Yeah, we give them to, they'd have to go into the food laboratory and try various experiments to develop the yogurt. And then you would analyze the yogurt in the laboratory and taste it to see does it come up to standard. Okay, now, if one of their knows that students should be able to identify an area for research, how would we assess that? They'd have to go reporting with them. They'd have to sit down and write out, this is the area that I'm going to research. And finally then, and we have our medical scholars here in front of us, okay, multiple sclerosis, how would you examine that? Okay, by means of multiple choice. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why many people use them, because multiple choice are particularly good for that. So generally speaking, it's not very difficult to devise an assessment method for particular learning outcomes. Now, when we're giving feedback to students, and all of our students are entitled in our university to meet us after their examinations. So a date is put aside, and each professor is sitting inside in his or her office, and the students can come around and they would say, oh look, you only gave me 65%, but I'm a brilliant student. Why did you not give me 75%? So you have to show them the criteria that you use. And I'll show you that now in a moment how it works. Now, learning outcomes are generally written as threshold statements. That is, learning outcomes are written at the pass-fail. So this is the minimum that the students must do. Many students will get well above the minimum, and students who don't do so well will get below the minimum. But generally speaking, rubrics are very helpful in showing students where they slipped up. And I will show you examples of rubrics in a moment. But generally, when we are giving feedback to students, you always start off by saying what they've done well. In other words, you affirm them and you were saying, well, you did a great job now in doing the literature review, or you did a very good job at the first part of this mathematical calculation, or you described very well how to do the chemistry experiment at the beginning, but unfortunately later on in the calculations you slipped up. So all is affirmed when you're giving feedback to the students. Get students to clarify their thinking. In other words, ask questions about specific aspects. Let them ask you questions, and you can ask them questions. Suggest that they improve. That's very important. Because assessment must be part of our teaching. And so if students come out of your office and they say, well, next year I won't make the same mistake, they've learned something. Okay? And often